What happens when one of country music's biggest stars comes face to face with questions he never expected to answer on live television? What we witnessed this morning on the Today Show with Jenna and friends was nothing short of explosive, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Tim McGraw walked off that set in the middle of a heated exchange. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story has layers you won't believe. The morning started like any other promotional appearance. Tim McGraw was scheduled for a standard interview to discuss his upcoming tour dates and his latest album. Jenna Bush Hager was joined by her usual co-hosts, and everything seemed perfectly normal as they welcomed the country superstar to the studio. The cameras were rolling, the audience was excited, and Tim appeared relaxed as he settled into the familiar interview setup. But what happened next caught everyone completely off guard. Jenna opened with what seemed like a routine question about his music, but there was something in her tone, something that suggested this wasn't going to be the typical softball interview that celebrities usually expect on morning television. She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious than usual, and asked Tim about his recent comments regarding the current state of the music industry. Tim's response was measured at first, diplomatic even. He talked about how the industry has changed over the years, how streaming has affected artists, and how he's adapted to stay relevant. Standard talking points that any seasoned performer would have ready. But Jenna wasn't satisfied with the surface-level answers. She pressed deeper, asking him specifically about his criticism of younger artists and their approach to country music. The tension in the studio began to build as Tim's answers became shorter, more defensive. His body language shifted noticeably. Where he had been leaning back comfortably just moments before, he now sat upright, his jaw tightening as Jenna continued to push for more specific responses. The other co-hosts exchanged glances, clearly sensing that this interview was taking an unexpected turn. Then came the question that changed everything. Jenna asked Tim directly about a recent controversy involving comments he allegedly made at a private industry event. Comments that had been reported by several music journalists but never officially confirmed. The question hung in the air for a moment, and you could feel the atmosphere in the studio shift dramatically. Tim's face darkened immediately. His voice, which had been warm and conversational throughout the early part of the interview, took on a completely different tone, sharp, defensive, and unmistakably irritated. He challenged Jenna on her sources, questioning whether she had verified the information before bringing it up on national television. The friendly banter that had characterized the opening minutes was gone, replaced by something much more confrontational. Jenna didn't back down. Instead of moving on to safer territory, as many hosts might have done, she doubled down. She mentioned specific names, specific incidents, and specific quotes that had been attributed to Tim. Her co-hosts tried to lighten the mood with a few interjections, but it was clear that both Jenna and Tim were now locked in a battle of wills that neither seemed willing to lose. The studio audience, which had been enthusiastic and engaged at the beginning, fell silent. You could hear the tension crackling through the air as these two strong personalities faced off. Tim accused Jenna of ambush journalism, of bringing him on the show under false pretenses only to blindside him with controversial topics that had nothing to do with why he thought he was there. But Jenna fired back immediately, pointing out that as a public figure who had made these statements, he should be prepared to defend them. She reminded him that this was live television, that millions of people were watching, and that his reactions were speaking volumes about the validity of the reports she was questioning him about. The back and forth continued to escalate, with Tim becoming increasingly agitated and Jenna becoming more determined to get straight answers. What started as a promotional interview had transformed into something resembling a contentious news segment, with both parties clearly frustrated by the direction things had taken. Tim's voice rose as he accused the show of setting him up, of using his appearance to create drama rather than genuinely discussing his music and career. He pointed out that he had been appearing on morning shows for decades and had never experienced anything like what was happening in that moment. The accusation hung heavy in the air as Jenna prepared her response, setting the stage for an even more intense confrontation that would ultimately lead to Tim's dramatic exit from the studio. Jenna's response was swift and cutting. She looked directly at Tim and said, "You're absolutely right. You have been doing morning shows for decades, which is exactly why I'm surprised you're so unprepared to address legitimate questions about your public statements." The words hit like a verbal slap, and Tim's expression immediately hardened. His hands, which had been resting casually on his knees, clenched into fists. Unprepared. Tim's voice rose significantly, causing several crew members to glance nervously at each other. "I came here to talk about my music, my tour, my fans. I didn't come here to be interrogated about gossip and rumors that you can't even verify." His southern accent became more pronounced as his anger grew, each word delivered with increasing intensity. But Jenna was ready with her counterattack. She reached for a tablet that had been sitting beside her chair and held it up. "These aren't rumors, Tim. I have 3 separate sources. all credible music industry professionals, who were present at the Nashville Music Awards after-party where you allegedly said, and I quote, that today's young country artists don't understand what real country music is supposed to sound like. The quote hit Tim like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for a moment, he seemed genuinely speechless. The studio fell completely silent except for the hum of cameras and lighting equipment. Even the production assistants stopped moving, everyone sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. When Tim finally found his voice, it was barely controlled fury. First of all, even if I did say something like that, which I'm not confirming, it was a private conversation at a private event. Second, you're taking things completely out of context and twisting them to fit whatever narrative you're trying to create here. Jenna's co-host attempted to jump in with a lighter comment about how passionate artists can be about their craft, but Jenna cut him off with a sharp look. She was clearly not interested in letting Tim off the hook. Context is exactly what I'm trying to establish here. Tim, help me understand the context. What did you mean when you made those comments? I didn't make any comments, Tim exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. You're sitting there reading from some tablet, claiming you have sources, but you won't name them. You won't provide any real proof. This is exactly what's wrong with media today. You take anonymous gossip and treat it like verified fact. The accusation clearly stung Jenna, who straightened in her chair and adopted an even more professional tone. I'm a journalist, Tim, not a gossip columnist. I don't report unverified information on national television. If I'm asking you about this, it's because I've done my homework and I believe these sources are credible. Your homework? Tim laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your homework is listening to people who probably weren't even at that party, who probably heard something third-hand, and now you're presenting it as fact. This is ambush journalism at its worst. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Tim's publicist, who had been standing quietly off camera, took a step forward, clearly considering whether to intervene. The show's producers were frantically communicating through their headsets, trying to decide how to handle this rapidly deteriorating situation. Jenna leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. Tim, I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you or did you not make disparaging comments about younger country artists at the Nashville Music Awards after party? It's a simple yes or no question. Tim stared at her for what felt like an eternity. The cameras captured every nuance of his expression as he seemed to wrestle with how to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Know what, Jenna? I've been in this business for 30 years. I've sold millions of records, played for millions of fans, and earned the respect of my peers through hard work and dedication. I don't owe you or anyone else an explanation for private conversations, real or imagined. But you do owe your fans honesty. Jenna shot back immediately. And if you're going around criticizing the artists they also love and support, don't they deserve to know where you stand? That was the moment everything changed. Tim's eyes flashed with genuine anger, and his voice dropped to a growl. Don't you dare lecture me about what I owe my fans. My fans have supported me for 3 decades because they know who I am and what I stand for. They don't need some morning show host telling them what they deserve to know about me. The personal nature of the attack caught Jenna off guard, but she recovered quickly. I'm not telling anyone anything, Tim. I'm asking you to tell them yourself. But your refusal to give a straight answer is pretty telling, don't you think? Tim stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward from the force. The sudden movement startled everyone in the studio, and you could hear gasps from the audience. You know what's telling? What's telling is that I came here as a favor, to promote my music and connect with fans, and instead, I'm being attacked by someone who thinks gotcha journalism is more important than actual reporting. Jenna remained seated, but her voice rose. To match his energy, sitting here asking you about your own words isn't an attack. Tim, it's accountability. Something that maybe you're not used to, but something that every public figure should expect. The words hit like a final straw. Tim's face contorted with rage as he pointed directly at Jenna. Accountability. You want to talk about accountability? How about you be accountable for doing actual research instead of relying on anonymous sources and secondhand gossip? How about you be accountable for misleading me about what this interview would cover? The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch, with both Tim and Jenna clearly beyond any possibility of returning to a civil conversation. The studio buzzed with nervous energy as crew members and producers tried to figure out how to salvage what had become a complete disaster. Jenna rose from her chair to match Tim's standing position, her professional composure still intact despite the chaos erupting around them. Tim, you're deflecting. You're standing there attacking my journalism instead of addressing the substance of what I'm asking you about. If these reports are false, just say they're false. If they're taken out of context, explain the context. But don't stand there and blame me for asking legitimate questions. Tim's hands were shaking with anger now, his voice reaching a volume that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. Legitimate questions. You ambushed me on live television with unverified gossip from unnamed sources, and you have the nerve to call that legitimate journalism. This is a hit piece disguised as an interview. A hit piece. Jenna's voice carried a note of incredulity. Tim, I asked you about statements that multiple witnesses say you made. That's not a hit piece, that's reporting. And your reaction right now is making this story much bigger than it ever needed to be. The comment about his reaction making the story bigger seemed to strike a nerve that hadn't been hit before. Tim's face went from red to nearly purple, and his voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow carried more threat than his shouting had. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? You brought me here knowing you were going to blindside me, knowing it would create a scene, knowing it would generate headlines for your show. Jenna didn't flinch under his intense glare. I brought you here to give you a chance to address these reports directly, in your own words, to your fans. The fact that you're choosing to create a scene instead of simply answering the question says more about you than it does about me. Create a scene. Tim laughed bitterly, spreading his arms wide to encompass the entire studio. Lady, you created this scene the moment you decided to turn what should have been a friendly interview into an interrogation. Don't blame me for reacting to your ambush tactics. One of Jenna's co-hosts finally managed to interject, his voice nervous but attempting to be diplomatic. Maybe we could all take a step back here and just focus on Tim's music and upcoming projects. I think everyone would love to hear about the new tour. Both Tim and Jenna turned to look at him with expressions that could have melted steel. Tim spoke first, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, now you want to talk about music. Now that your co-host has gotten her gotcha moment, now we can move on to safer topics. I don't think so. Jenna's response was equally sharp. We can talk about whatever Tim wants to talk about, as soon as he answers the question I asked him. It's really that simple. Simple. Tim's voice cracked with disbelief. There's nothing simple about what you're doing here. You're trying to destroy my reputation based on rumors and gossip, and you want me to help you do it by playing along with your games. Your reputation. Jenna seized on the word immediately. Tim, if your reputation can be destroyed by you simply answering whether or not you made certain comments, maybe the problem isn't with my question. Maybe the problem is with the comments themselves. The logical trap in her argument hit Tim like a physical blow. For a moment, he stood there speechless, clearly recognizing that any response he gave would only dig him deeper into the hole he had created. The studio audience watched in fascination as one of country music's biggest stars struggled to find a way out of the corner he had painted himself into. When Tim finally spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with barely contained rage. You know what, Jenna? I've been in this business long enough to recognize a setup when I see one. I've been ambushed by better journalists than you, and I've learned that sometimes the only winning move is not to play the game at all. This isn't a game, Tim, Jenna replied immediately. This is a conversation about your public statements and your responsibility to your fans and fellow artists. If you can't handle that conversation, then maybe you should reconsider making public statements in the first place. The suggestion that he should reconsider making public statements clearly pushed Tim past his breaking point. His voice rose to a shout that could be heard throughout the entire studio complex. Don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't say. I've earned the right to have opinions about my own industry, and I don't need permission from some morning show host to express them. Having opinions and expressing them publicly comes with consequences. Tim, Jenna shot back without missing a beat, and one of those consequences is being asked to explain and defend those opinions. That's not ambush journalism. That's basic accountability in a free society. Tim stared at her with unconcealed hatred, his chest heaving as he struggled to control his breathing. The cameras captured every moment of his internal struggle, broadcasting his fury to millions of viewers who had tuned in expecting a routine celebrity interview. Finally, Tim's publicist stepped forward, clearly deciding that the situation had deteriorated beyond any hope of recovery. She approached Tim cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal, and placed a gentle hand on his arm. Tim, maybe we should take a break and discuss this privately. But Tim shook off her hand roughly, never taking his eyes off Jenna. No, we're not taking a break. We're done. Completely done. I came here in good faith, and I have been treated with complete disrespect and dishonesty. This interview is over. Jenna remained standing, her posture straight and professional despite the chaos swirling around her. Tim, you're welcome to leave anytime you want, but walking away from this conversation isn't going to make the questions disappear. They're still going to be there tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until you decide to address them. Honestly, her words seemed to hit Tim like a final insult. His hands clenched into fists again, and for a moment, it looked as though he might actually lose complete control. The tension in the studio reached a peak that had everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Tim's face contorted with absolute fury as Jenna's final words sank in. The suggestion that these questions would follow him indefinitely, that walking away wouldn't solve his problem, seemed to be the catalyst for what happened next. His voice when he finally spoke, was barely recognizable, filled with a venom that shocked everyone in the studio. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've got me trapped here, that I have no choice but to play your little game and dance to your tune? Well, let me tell you something about accountability. Since you're so fond of that word, you're accountable for ambushing a guest on live television. You're accountable for turning what should have been a respectful interview into a circus. And you're accountable for showing your viewers exactly what kind of person you really are." Jenna's composure finally showed the first crack it had displayed throughout the entire confrontation. Her voice carried a slight tremor, but her words remained sharp. "What kind of person I am? Tim, I'm the kind of person who asks direct questions and expects honest answers. I'm the kind of person who believes that public figures should be held accountable for their public statements. If that makes me the villain in your story, then I can live with that." "Villain?" Tim laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor, cold and bitter. "Lady, you're not important enough to be a villain. You're just another hack journalist looking for your 15 minutes of fame by trying to tear down someone who's actually accomplished something in this world." The personal attack clearly stung Jenna more than anything else Tim had said during their heated exchange. Her professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine hurt before snapping back into place. "My 15 minutes of fame. Tim, I've been doing this job for years, building my career on honest journalism and respectful interviews. I don't need to tear anyone down to validate my own success." "Honest journalism." Tim's voice rose to a near scream. "Is that what you call this? Ambushing guests with unverified rumors and refusing to let them explain their side of the story. If this is your idea of honest journalism, then the industry is in worse shape than I thought. I've been trying to let you explain your side for the past 20 minutes. Jenna's voice finally matched his volume, her own anger breaking through her professional facade. "Every question I've asked has been an opportunity for you to clarify, to explain, to tell your side. But instead of answering, you've chosen to attack me, attack my sources, attack my profession, and attack this show." Tim took a step closer to Jenna, his imposing physical presence suddenly feeling threatening in the confined studio space. Several crew members moved nervously, clearly unsure whether they should intervene. "I've chosen to defend myself against a coordinated attack, and you know what? I'm done defending. I'm done explaining. I'm done pretending that this is anything other than a setup designed to humiliate me on national television." "Nobody set you up, Tim," Jenna replied, standing her ground despite his intimidating proximity. "You're humiliating yourself right now, in front of millions of viewers, by refusing to simply address the substance of what you allegedly said. Your reaction is creating the story, not my questions." Those words seemed to trigger something primal in Tim. His face went completely white, then flushed deep red again. When he spoke, his voice was so low and controlled that it was somehow more frightening than his shouting had been. "My reaction is creating the story. You dragged me onto this show under false pretenses, ambushed me with gossip and rumors, refused to accept my explanations, and now you're blaming me for reacting like any normal human being would react to being attacked. Any normal human being would simply answer the question," Jenna replied coolly. "Any innocent person would simply deny the allegations if they were false. Your extreme reaction suggests that there's more truth to these reports than you want to admit." That was the moment Tim finally snapped completely. His hands flew up in the air in a gesture of complete exasperation and rage. "That's it. I'm done. This is exactly the kind of twisted logic that passes for journalism these days. If I answer, I'm validating your ambush tactics. If I don't answer, I must be guilty. It's a rigged game, and I refuse to play it for one more second." Tim began moving toward the studio exit, his long strides carrying him quickly across the set. His publicist hurried after him, along with his assistant and security detail. The cameras followed his movement, capturing every moment of his dramatic departure. But Jenna wasn't finished. Her voice carried across the studio, following Tim as he walked away. "Tim, running away from these questions isn't going to make them disappear. Your fans deserve better than this. The industry deserves better than this." Tim stopped dead in his tracks, just steps away from the studio exit. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around and continue the confrontation. The entire studio held its breath, cameras trained on his back, waiting to see what he would do next. Instead, Tim spoke without turning around, his voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "You want to know what the industry deserves? The industry deserves to be protected from people like you. People who think journalism means tearing down artists instead of celebrating their contributions. The industry deserves better than ambush interviews disguised as promotion." And with that, Tim McGraw walked out of the studio, his team scrambling to follow him. The heavy studio door slammed shut behind them with a sound that seemed to echo through the stunned silence that followed. Jenna stood alone in the middle of the set, cameras still rolling. Facing an audience that didn't know whether to applaud or sit in shocked silence, she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and looked directly into the camera. While she said, her voice remarkably steady, considering what had just transpired, That was certainly not how we expected this interview to go. We'll be right back after this break. What you just witnessed was one of the most dramatic celebrity meltdowns in morning television history. The fallout from this confrontation is still spreading across social media and entertainment news outlets. What do you think? Was Jenna right to press Tim on these allegations, or did she cross a line with her questioning? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.